Leave that cross outside. This is my courtroom. Judge Harold Grayson snapped, his voice cutting through the hushed air of the packed courtroom like a blade. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, zeroed in on the silver cross necklace resting against Pam Bondi's chest. The Attorney General stood tall at the witness stand, her posture unwavering, her expression calm yet resolute. The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of the judge's words hanging heavy over the rows of spectators, lawyers, and reporters. Whispers rippled through the crowd moments later, a low hum of disbelief and curiosity. What had just happened? Where was this going? Pam Bondi didn't flinch, she didn't blink. Her fingers, resting lightly on the edge of the stand, remained steady. The cross gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights, a quiet symbol of her faith that had now become the judge's target. For the past hour she had been testifying with precision and authority, dismantling the arguments of the plaintiff's legal team in a case that had gripped the nation. It was a deportation dispute. A foreigner, a man named Javier Morales, facing removal under an executive order signed by President Donald Trump. The order had been clear: swift deportation for those who posed a security risk. But Judge Grayson, known for his liberal leanings, had struck it down, calling it unconstitutional. Now Pam Bondi, as Attorney General, was here to defend the administration's stance, and the clash had reached a boiling point. The case itself was a powder keg. Javier Morales had entered the country illegally years ago, built a life, and then been flagged after an altercation tied to a radical group. The Trump administration wasted no time. Executive Order 13987 had been signed, prioritizing national security and expediting deportations. Morales's lawyers fought back, arguing due process violations, and Judge Grayson had agreed, issuing an injunction. The administration appealed, and here they were in a courtroom crackling with tension. Pam Bondi had spent the morning laying out the government's case, the evidence of Morales's ties, the legal precedent, the executive's authority. Her arguments were tight, her delivery fierce. Grayson, though, had countered at every turn, his tone growing sharper, his patience thinning. Until now. Until this. The judge leaned forward, his black robe rustling as he pointed a finger at Pam. "I'm tired of your sanctimonious tone, Ms. Bondi. You come in here waving your faith like it's a shield, but this is a court of law, not a church. Leave your props at the door." His voice dripped with disdain, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The spectators exchanged glances, some shocked, some smirking, others uneasy. A woman in the back whispered to her neighbor, "Did he really just say that?" A man in a suit scribbled furiously on a notepad, sensing a headline. The plaintiff's attorney, a wiry man named Daniel Kessler, shifted in his seat, unsure whether to capitalize on the moment or let it play out. Pam Bondi tilted her head slightly, her blue eyes locking onto Grayson's. She didn't respond immediately, and that pause, those few seconds of silence, felt like an eternity. The judge smirked, thinking he'd rattled her. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, confident he'd regained control. He'd been losing ground all morning, her arguments chipping away at his ruling, exposing its weaknesses. She'd cited case law he couldn't dismiss, statistics he couldn't refute. He'd tried to interrupt, to redirect, but she'd stayed on course, her voice steady, her logic unrelenting. This jab at her necklace, it was personal. It was a desperate swing from a man who felt the tide turning against him. "Your Honor," Pam began, her voice low but clear, each word deliberate. "This cross isn't a prop, it's not a shield. It's a reminder." She paused again, letting the weight settle. The whispers in the courtroom faded as every ear strained to hear her next words. A reminder of the principles this nation was built on. Principles you swore to uphold when you took your oath. Freedom. Justice. The right to believe. To speak. To stand for what's true. You mock this cross, but it's not just mine. It's the same faith that guided the founders, the same faith that's carried millions through trials you'll never understand. Judge Grayson's smirk vanished. His jaw tightened and he opened his mouth to interrupt, but Pam raised a hand. Not sharply, but with a quiet authority that stopped him cold. "You don't get to silence me," she continued, her tone unshaken. "Not my voice, not my faith, not the law. You sit there, Your Honor, acting like this courtroom is your kingdom. But it's not. It belongs to the people. It belongs to justice, and justice isn't served by tearing down what you don't understand. The room was still. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the court stenographer's fingers hovered over her keys as if afraid to break the moment. Grayson's face reddened, his earlier confidence replaced by something unsteady, anger, maybe, or embarrassment. He'd overstepped, and everyone knew it. Pam Bondi stood there, her cross catching the light, her words echoing in the silence. She wasn't just defending a deportation order anymore. She was defending something bigger, something deeper. The judge cleared his throat, trying to reclaim his footing. "Ms. Bondi, this is not a sermon. Stick to the case." His voice was gruff, but it lacked the bite from before. The spectators could hear it, the crack in his armor. Pam nodded, as if indulging a child. "The case, Your Honor, is simple. Javier Morales broke the law. He entered illegally. He stayed illegally. And when evidence tied him to a group that threatens American lives, the president acted, within his authority, under the Constitution you claim to protect. You canceled that order not because it was wrong, but because you didn't like it. You let bias cloud your judgment, and now you're letting it cloud this room." A gasp rippled through the crowd. She'd gone there, called him out, not just as a judge, but as a man. Kessler, the plaintiff's attorney, shot to his feet. "Objection! This is outrageous." "Sit down," Grayson barked, but his eyes stayed on Pam. He didn't overrule her, he couldn't. She'd struck a nerve, and the truth of it hung in the air. Kessler sank back into his chair, flustered. Pam pressed on. "You asked me to leave my faith outside, but I won't. Because my faith teaches me to stand for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when a judge tries to shame me for it. This cross reminds me that truth doesn't bend to power, not yours, not anyone's. And the truth here is that the law supports this deportation. The executive order stands. Your ruling doesn't." The courtroom felt electric. A woman in the front row clutched her purse, her eyes wide. A man near the aisle nodded slowly, as if piecing it together. The reporters scribbled faster, sensing history unfolding. Judge Grayson stared at Pam, his hands gripping the bench. He'd wanted to break her, to put her in her place. Instead, she'd turned the tables, and he had no answer. He banged his gavel, the sound sharp but hollow. "We'll take a recess," he muttered, rising abruptly and disappearing through the door behind the bench. The room erupted into chatter as soon as he was gone. Voices overlapping, some awed, some indignant. "Did she just school him?" a young man whispered. "She's got guts," an older woman replied. Pam stepped down from the stand, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She adjusted her jacket, the cross still visible, still shining. Her co-counsel, a seasoned lawyer named Tom Reynolds, approached her, shaking his head in disbelief. "You just turned this into a legend," he said quietly. She smiled faintly but didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her words had done the work. Back in the judge's chambers, Grayson slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. He'd lost control, publicly, spectacularly. He'd meant to assert his authority, to remind everyone who ran this courtroom. Instead, he'd handed Pam Bondi a stage, and she'd used it to dismantle him. Her response wasn't just a defense of her faith or the case, it was a lesson. A lesson in humility, in accountability, in the limits of power. He'd mocked her cross, thinking it a weakness. She'd shown it was her strength. When the recess ended, the courtroom reconvened, but the energy had shifted. Grayson's rulings for the rest of the session were clipped, mechanical. Pam's testimony resumed, and she finished it with the same unshakable clarity. The case wasn't decided that day. Appeals would drag it out, but the moment lingered. It spread beyond the courtroom, carried by whispers, then headlines, then viral clips online. Pam Bondi silences judge in epic courtroom showdown, one read. "Faith and law collide and faith wins," said another. For the people who'd been there, though, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about the silence after her words, the way it wrapped around everyone, forcing them to listen, to think. Pam Bondi had walked into that courtroom as Attorney General, but she'd left as something more. She'd taught a lesson, not just to Judge Grayson, but to everyone watching. Faith, when real, doesn't bow, and neither does truth.